We're here with Forrest Dunbar running for the open assembly seat in East Anchorage. Hello, Forrest.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I'm a lifelong Alaskan. I grew up in a village called Eagle on the Yukon River and then Cordova on Prince William Sound. And once I finished school, I started coming to Anchorage, and I eventually moved here to East Anchorage. I lived on Northern Lights for a little while, and now I live in Muldoon. And I serve on the community council in Scenic Foothills. I helped start the Muldoon Farmers Market, and that's how I got involved with local issues, local politics. I've been going to a lot of assembly meetings as well. So I'm very excited for this opportunity and honored to be considered to represent East Anchorage on the assembly.
Now, why are you running?
Well, I think there's two main things. First of all, we want to create a sort of a vibrant, forward-looking city that attracts and retains young people and young families and keeps them here. And that'll help keep our economy strong so we can take care of our elderly and make this a good place to live for everyone. And then beyond that, I think we all recognize that we're entering a really challenging period. Where the budget is going to be tight. We're going to have reduced funds from the state. And so we need to have leadership on the council, or rather on the assembly, to help us get through that. And so I want to be that reasonable voice, someone in the center to bring people together and help us get through what's going to be a really challenging period for Anchorage.
Now, when you ran for Congress, a criticism was that you just didn't have a lot of experience. Is this a way for you to get some of that experience?
I think I have the experience needed for this position. Like I said, I've been working with the community council. I've been involved since I got back to Anchorage, and I've been involved in politics in one way or another for a while. But I do think I have the necessary qualifications for this particular race. I've also been going door to door and getting to know people and meet people, and it's a very large district, 55,000 people. But it's been a great experience to see little parts of the district. It's a district I think everybody kind of, if you've driven around East Anchorage, if you've lived here for years like I have, you sort of know the general neighborhoods, but there's all these really interesting little nooks and crannies you get into and meet people. And that's been a really rewarding part of the process. But I'm confident I'll be an effective representative for East Anchorage, particularly because of the relationships I have on the assembly, in the administration, on the school board, that kind of thing.
For sure, and you've already touched on the budget.
Sure.
How do you think you can help the Muni address the budget issue?
I think we're going to have to be creative. We're going to have new ideas. We're going to have to look for ways to save funds. I will be the youngest person on the assembly by quite a bit, and I'm hoping that new perspective will bring some new ideas, and I'll bring together people who maybe haven't before. But there's no question we're going to have to go through the municipal budget line by line, with a fine-tooth comb and try to find savings. That being said, I think it's also important that we don't panic. The situation of the state is very troubling, and it would be nice to have a little more leadership out of Juneau. But the city's finances are in a stronger place, and so we need to remember that and try to keep our housing market strong, and we'll weather the storm. Like I said, I've lived in Alaska, or I've been in Alaska my whole life, and we've been in tough places before. The late '80s, late '90s. We've had low oil prices. We've had budget problems before. And the truth is, we actually have a lot more savings now than we've had in the past. So the savings will help us hopefully get through part of it. And then, like I said, it's just going to take leadership and working together.
Now, when you talk about going through that budget line by line,
sure,
what are some of those items that you can think of that, first off, that might have to be cut? It's a tough decision, but...
Sure. So I think the SAP sort of fiasco is coming to an end, hopefully, and that right there will be some significant savings. We're going to have to look for places where we can consolidate and where there's some overlap, where maybe an IT department or something like that could be working for two departments rather than just one. I think the school budget, people have been pointing to that. Now, my mom was a public school teacher, and we're not going to be able to attract and retain people or get people to raise their kids here if we don't have good schools. But I think you can look at the administrative budget of the school district and say there's probably some savings to be found there. That is going to be done by the school board, but ultimately the assembly is the one that has the final say. And so I expect to work with the school board and the school board members to help find savings there too.
How do you think the Muni can or should diversify the economy as far as taxes go?
I'm sorry, could you clarify that question a little?
How do you think the Muni should try to diversify the taxes right now? the weight is on the shoulders of the property owners.
So you're talking about, there are two different issues there, right? There's diversifying the economy and there's diversifying the tax base. And
Yes,
those are sort of different
the tax
things.
base.
Okay, yeah. Diversifying the economy is something we all want to do and we've been trying to do. And I think we actually are in better shape there than we used to be, with the Alaska Native corporations that have done a lot of work and a variety of other businesses that have come in. We're less dependent now on oil than we used to be. But still, of course, it's our biggest industry. In terms of diversifying the tax base, I've been speaking with people about whether or not they want a sales tax. That's sort of what people usually point to. Right now, I don't think it's a realistic option. I think people are worried that if we have a sales tax and a property tax, they'll both just rise simultaneously. I would only support a sales tax if it was used to directly offset property taxes. In terms of other revenue streams, commercial marijuana is definitely going to have some tax revenue. I don't think it'll be quite as much as some people might be hoping for, but it'll be something. And I'm hoping we can use that mostly on public safety. Another thing I think we need to start talking about, and I went to a budget advisory commission meeting a couple months ago, and they were talking about the variety of exemptions that have sort of carved out places for different organizations. And that means, when an organization gets a carve out from the property taxes, that means homeowners pay a little bit more. And so I'm not saying we do away with all of them. I mean, a lot of them are really valuable, things like the veterans tax exemption, for example, or the senior tax exemption. But I think we need to at least look at them and talk about whether or not they make sense for the city, and whether or not we could shift some of the burden off of homeowners and renters, basically everyday Alaskans. And so that's something we're going to at least have to start discussing.
Do you support changes to the way we calculate the tax cap?
I think we've probably tinkered with it enough. I support the tax cap. It was changed under Sullivan and then changed back, and then they changed it again, or they're planning on changing it again. We keep changing it, and it makes it difficult for investors to make decisions. I think if people are talking about specifically Proposition 8, I think they should read the League of Women Voters pamphlet that went out. There are two sides to it. If the voters decide that that's something they want, then obviously I'll help enforce that, and we'll work in those parameters. But I think there are some unintended consequences from that particular ballot initiative and the way it's written. And if you read both sides in the League of Women Voters, I think a lot of people are going to come down on the no side just because it makes it so we can't use one-time state funds to provide tax rebates. And so in some cases, it might actually sort of perversely lead to higher property taxes. It also creates a sort of use it or lose it system, or reinforces a use it or lose it system that incentivizes the Assembly to tax to the cap every time. So I think what's important is that we have some flexibility and we don't tax to the cap every time. And historically, the Assembly doesn't usually, or hasn't recently, taxed all the way to the cap. And I want to keep that going and try to see what we can do to stay further under the cap and reduce the burden on property holders.
Okay, have you voted yet?
I have not. No, we'll probably do like I'm sure we'll do a social media post or something like that when I eventually get to the polls. It started yesterday.
Yeah.
Early voting started yesterday. Yeah.
So when you get there, your vote as far as Prop 8 goes.
Sure. I'm still thinking about it. It'll probably be a no. I think a lot of people will say no, it's enough tinkering with this now. And like I said, the actual impact, so the mayor did an analysis of the impact of Prop 8, and it looks like it's $1.5 to $2 million. Some of the proponents have used like $52 million or $1,200 per person or something like that, but that's based on if we had taxed to the cap every time the last 6 years, and that's not actually the case. So their counterfactual was not factual, if that makes sense. Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about public safety.
Okay.
How can we make Anchorage a safer place to live?
Well, I think the first thing to do, and I think myself and my opponent agree on this, is we have to bolster the size of the police force. We have to get back over 400 officers. Most recent analysis has somewhere between, I think it's 450 and 460, right in there. I think it's going to be difficult to get that high, but we certainly need to try. And having a larger police forces means we can, reconstitute or reinvigorate the theft unit. We can do more of those kind of investigations. We can have more police doing community policing, which is very important. But beyond that, increasing the size of the police force is one component. Keeping our first responders, our firefighters strong is another component because they provide life-saving care. But there are other things that people can do. Neighborhood watches, the program Next Door, which I recommend people get on and talk to each other about. The Napa Valley Community Patrol is something I think that we should continue to support and see if we can replicate it in other neighborhoods as well. My friend Aaron Pascar does a great job there, and everyone else who's involved with that in the Napa Valley. So there's a number of things we can do. And I'm optimistic, you know, and I think East Anchorage kind of gets a bad rap as being uniquely dangerous. Really, it's a city-wide issue, and the whole city is going to have to work on it.
Okay. Now, the mayor's been pushing housing first. How
Sure.
can you help the Muni deal with Anchorage's homeless population?
So I do support housing first. I don't support every project, and you know there might be a housing first project I think is done in the wrong way. And I know the people in the community council, for example, in Fairview, has some concerns with how Carlick Manor was done. But I think in general, the concept of getting a roof over someone's head, getting them medically stabilized, being able to provide them services, it's both the moral thing to do and it's the fiscally conservative thing to do. Because if they're on the street, they consume a lot of first responder resources. It's hugely expensive to be medevacing them constantly and having to have our police or the community service patrol go and pick them up. So if you can get a roof over their head, typically it saves the city money, and we've seen that other places. But it also gives them opportunity. Some of them will get better. Some of them, unfortunately, will pass away in the housing first model, but at least they'll have some dignity. I mean, I think that's really important, that people have dignity and that they are able to have a roof over their head. So I support housing first as a concept, and I think it's going to be incumbent upon the whole city to make it work, particularly our religious leaders. And that's something I want to work on if I'm on the assembly, is trying to get the religious community really galvanized behind this issue. And some of them have. I mean, there's organizations like AFAC that have been working on it, but more of the religious community getting involved, I think, would be a positive thing.
Okay. Another housing issue, there's a shortage of housing in Anchorage, and
Yeah.
the population is projected to grow. How can you help the Muni prepare to deal with that?
Is the population still projected to grow? I mean, that's an interesting question. I think we actually fell or leveled off last year. It's certainly challenging. The vacancy rate is about 3%, and we're all kind of waiting to see what happens with the housing market, and we want to keep the housing market as stable as possible. I certainly think that we need to encourage mixed-use development, particularly downtown by the sort of employment centers. And people in my generation, a lot of us like to have the more walkable cities with a little bit denser development. Not everybody supports that, but I do think that we need to have some housing, some more efforts at affordable housing. And when I say affordable housing, I don't just mean the things that are qualified for Section 8 or those kind of programs, but affordable for every sort of income level. And if it requires some changes to Title 21, that's something I'll definitely look to and discuss with. Yeah, it's an ongoing issue. I mean, Title 21 is an ongoing issue, and I'm going to, hopefully if I get in there, I'm going to have a chance to look at it in a lot more depth.
All right. Now, this summer, Anchorage will get to see a whole new industry start up.
Yeah.
How do you think the Muni should be regulating commercial marijuana?
So majority of Alaskans voted for marijuana legalization, and majority of people in East Anchorage voted for marijuana legalization. So I think the important thing is that we be honest to the voters and we don't try to nullify what they did. That is, we're not going to try to regulate the business out of existence. That's wrong. It's undemocratic. I think it's also sort of short-sighted. Now people have some genuine health and safety concerns. They don't want it near a school, for example, or a park where children are playing. I understand that. And in some of the parts of my district, of East Anchorage, of our district, there are sort of these residential areas, for example, Scenic Foothills, where I'm on the community council, where they don't really want commercial marijuana in those residential areas. And I think fortunately, as the regulations are written now, you have to be zoned industrial or zoned commercial. You can't be zoned residential. So there's relatively few places where those businesses can actually go in. And last I had seen, I saw an interactive map recently that had where the applications were being made. There haven't been any in East Anchorage, at least last time I'd seen it. I expect there will be one or two, maybe more, but not so much in those residential areas. So I think the balance that the Assembly has struck now is a pretty good one. I'm sure there will be things to hash out as we go forward. I mean, there's no question that there's going to be work to be done. But in general, I think the Assembly has taken a pretty reasonable approach. And you know, people in general, I think, have been, I hope we can maintain that kind of civil discourse and talk about things reasonably.
All right. The Anchorage School District wants to ask voters to approve bonds over the next 6 years, knowing that taxpayers will likely be paying for all of that money. Do you support that?
I support the current school bond. Now, I know that there are some that are being projected into the future, the next few years, and I'll look at those year to year. But this year, I do support the school bond. And I think it's important for people to know that the city has, the municipality has retired more debt than we've added. And that's a really important point. People always say, oh, this is going to, we're always adding this debt, but we don't do a good job of publicizing how much we have gotten rid of, which is great, and we're in a pretty good state right now. But again, if there's going to be less money coming from the state and we have critical maintenance to do, then I think it's important that we approve these bonds. If we don't, it's going to cost us more down the line, potentially much more down the line. So I think it's the reasonable thing to do right now.
Okay, last question for you.
Sure.
How would you rate the mayor's performance so far? What grade would you give him?
Oh, that's interesting. I haven't even thought about it that way. I think it's. I think he's done a pretty good job. I think he's done actually a quite good job. And when it's funny, I've been door knocking and speaking with a lot of people in East Anchorage of all different political stripes, Democrat, Republican, most people are independent or undeclared. And generally people seem pretty satisfied with the direction of the city. I mean, they certainly want more savings. They certainly want, in most cases, a reduction in property taxes on homeowners. But the overall approach of being accessible and being positive and being forward-looking and trying to create a city where people want to live and keep living and raise their children. I think that's something that the mayor shares, and I think it's something that people have been reacting positively to. I was asked by another news program if I would work well with the mayor, and what I said, and what I think is true, is if he's doing things that I think will help East Anchorage, I'll be there by his side. If he's doing things I think hurt East Anchorage, I'll be opposed. For me, it's about representing East Anchorage and making sure that East Anchorage has a voice on the Anchorage Assembly.
All right, Forrest Dunbar running for Anchorage Assembly out of East Anchorage.
Thank you
for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.